Sometimes our choices in life can come back to embarrass us. Sandra Newman Bentley wrote an article for Reader's Digest back in 1994, and this is a little quote from that. She says, "As we were leaving the lobby of a hotel in which we were staying, our 3-year-old son looked down at the doormat with the hotel logo on it and said, 'Hey, that's on our towels at home.'" Kent Inkenberry told a story about he and his wife, Diana, meeting with a new couple at church one Sunday morning. Here's what he said, and I quote him: "We stopped to introduce ourselves and to exchange pleasantries, like you do. We described the friendly neighborhood we lived in and listened sympathetically as they lamented that theirs was just the opposite. Saying our goodbyes, we got in our cars and drove home. As we approached our house, we were horrified to see that our newfound friends were pulling into the driveway next to ours." Horrible neighbors, great neighbors. I think sometimes our choices come back to haunt us, but here's the thing. How do you view your choices? Some see the Lord God Almighty making all the choices, that He is absolute sovereign. He is the author. He's the creator. He's the predestinator. He's the captain. He's the judge. He is everything. He makes the choices in their minds. John Calvin said, "All events whatsoever are governed by the secret counsel of God." And if you're of that persuasion, there are a few scriptures up on the board for you, because most, I'd say, of our people are probably not as much of that persuasion. That's the reason I thought I'd put a few more verses up there to help you understand why people do think that way. But some see man making all the choices. They see man as the absolute ruler of his life, that he's the captain of his own life. He's the decider. He's the chooser. He's the one with the free will. He is the judge of his own life, and he determines his own fate. Invictus, which was made popular probably more than most would know by Nelson Mandela when we were living in South Africa, this was made known as his favorite poem. He was president back in 1994 in South Africa. Invictus is a Latin word for unconquerable or undefeated. It was written actually back in 1875 by William Ernest Henley. Let me read you some words because some of you will feel this fits you perfectly. "Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeoning of chance, my head is bloodied but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." And there are many scriptures that seem to suggest that you do have a choice and you decide what happens in your life. And I left them there for you to look at. Pontius Pilate is given the awesome responsibility as the 5th governor of the Roman province of Judea. He has served since 26-27 AD and he will serve to around 36 or 37 AD, depending on how you count the years. He was known, as you well know from the reading, as presiding over the trial of Jesus and making a decision about Barabbas or Jesus. And that's what we're looking at this morning. What you may not be aware is you notice how he seems to struggle with this. It almost looks like he's trying to avoid making the decision, and that he calls him even a just man or a righteous man. His wife does the same thing. Because of that, what you may not know is that there are those that believe he became a believer in Jesus. And those that believe that are the Ethiopian and the Coptic churches of Africa. They actually have a story of how Pontius Pilate came to faith in Jesus Christ. And that even at the moment that this is happening, he was struggling with that concept. I don't know if that's true, but it is an interesting concept behind the concept of what we're looking at. I want us to look at three choices that are involved in this text that some think they have, and I say it that way, and I'm going to say it again. Some think they have a choice. We'll see. Number one, the compromising choice some think they have. In Matthew chapter 27, we'll read it again. You can read it up there. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to releasing to the multitude one prisoner whom they wished. This was just a custom. And at that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" I don't know what he thought would be the outcome of that. I have no idea at this moment, except it says in the next verse, "For he knew that they had handed him over because of envy." He knew that the leaders were envious of the amount of people that was following Jesus and listening to Jesus and not listening to them. Verse 19, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, "Have nothing to do with that just man." That judgment seat, we know the pavement where this actually took place. It's identified clearly. To this day, you can walk there, stand there. "Have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him." Here's the truth. Some think they have the choice of pleasing an egotistical priesthood. That's what they thought that day. Today, what we find is that's not the choice so much, but it's similar. Some think they have the choice of pleasing their preacher. Now, I'm not talking about you pleasing me. I'm talking about people who make choices about whether or not they're going to go to church or where they go to church based upon their preachers or their leaders at their church, and not based upon whether or not they're going to follow the Lord and do things right or not. It's based upon some influence someone has over them. On the other hand, because the wife got involved in this, some think they have a choice of pleasing an anxious partner. You may not be aware of this, but some of you undoubtedly are, maybe from your own experience, that there have been baptisms even among us because the wife or the husband pushed them to, and they weren't converted. They didn't believe. It was all a choice to please a person and get them off their back. I'm just suggesting to you that some think they have a choice, and they think they have the choice of just making my mate happy. Some think they have the choice of, I'm just keeping my preacher happy. When they ask themselves, what shall I do with Jesus Christ? Some will make a compromising choice because not only they think they can, but because the choice, in their opinion, doesn't really matter. The crucifixion choice some think they have. Look at verse 20. So the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. As you see, the priests had control. They got the crowd stirred up. I don't know how large the crowd was, but they were able to persuade them to do this. I guess out of fear of the priest and what they might do. Verse 21, the governor answered and said to them, which of the two do you want me to release to you? They said, Barabbas, went along with the priest. Verse 22, Pilate said to them, what then shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ? They all said to him, let him be crucified. The most vile thing you could do to a human on the planet at the time. Nothing was considered worse than this. It was crucifixion. Verse 23. Why would they think that? Why would religious people think that's what you should do? Verse 23. Then the governor said, why? What evil has he done? Notice the term. He must be evil. You would not dare want to do this to a rabbi. He must be terrible. Why? What evil has he done? They cried out all the more, saying, let him be crucified. Don't bother me with facts. My mind's made up. He needs to go. And he needs to go in the most horrible way. You see, some think they have the choice of crucifying one believed to be a criminal. You see, there are people who consider them so smart, they think we're all fools. They're smart atheists. They might not even actually be atheists. They're kind of like the atheist that says, I don't believe in God and I don't like him. They're kind of like the agnostic that says, I really don't think there is a God, but I can't prove it, but I sure don't want him in my life because he tells you what to do. I'm just suggesting to you that if he's a criminal, and that's where they would have to go, because he's really not that great, because if he's just a man, right? If he's just a man, he's a liar and he's a blasphemer. That's the truth. So therefore, they're right if he's not the Son of God. And he should be killed. On the other hand, they think they have that choice of crucifying. Some think they have the choice of crucifying one that is believed to be the Christ. So they'll even let it into their heads that maybe he was the Christ, but I don't want him. Are you listening? I got stuff to do in my life. I got some sinning to do. I got some fun times ahead for me. Crucify him because I don't need him right now. And you think maybe you have that choice. You see, that person sees themselves as smarter than religious folks who are living their puritanical lives when I'm cool and I get to do what I want. Well, when they ask themselves, what shall I do with Jesus Christ? They make a crucifixion choice that they think they have. And why? Because he doesn't matter that much to me. Number 3, the charge choice some think they have. We're going to begin reading now from verse 24. When Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising. Now this is again an indication that Pilate didn't really think this was the best choice, right? And he also didn't like it that the crowd was getting this upset, right? Because he's the governor, and he's to keep things tapped down. That's his job. When Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising, in other words, he didn't do anything evil. Why do y'all want him killed? He's trying to tap that down. He took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. Oh, that if it was so simple. You see to it. Verse 25. And all the people answered and said, his blood be upon us and our children. What a thing to say. Verse 26. Then he released Barabbas to them. Notice that. He released Barabbas to this multitude. I'm sure there was hugs, patting him on the back. Good to have you home, Barabbas. And when he had scourged Jesus, what was that necessary for? Why didn't he scourge him? He's already going to crucify him. Is that not enough? Why do you need to scourge him too? Makes it questionable to me whether or not he believed, right? And when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Now, some think that they have the choice. Their choice is pleasing their crowd. You see, to them, the crowd matters. Their buddies, popularity. They want to be in. What they really live like, they live life as a politician. Right? You've seen the politicians. What do you know about them? They all lie about everything. Looks like it, doesn't it? Looks like it. Looks like they lie about everything, right? I mean, you've watched them enough now. Well, what does it say about you if you live a political life? You basically don't tell anybody the whole truth. You kind of tell half-truths to everybody. And you tell them what they want to hear. Why? Because you just want everybody to love you. So you go along with the crowd. You think you have that right. The crowd must be right. It ain't never been right before, but the crowd must be right. And some think not only do they have the choice of pleasing the crowd, but some think they have the choice of just washing their hands of anything they've done wrong. I'm done. Oh yeah, I did that, but I've washed my hands of that. I don't know if y'all remember, there's an old song, I must have washed my hands in a muddy stream. Tried to do what my daddy told me, but I must have washed my hands in a muddy stream. I don't think you can just do that. But there are a lot of people who think they can. They think that, well, that was yesterday. And they don't think they have to answer for their sins to anybody. They're on another page now. They're making the decisions for their life. So when they're asking themselves, when they ask themselves, what shall I do with Jesus Christ? Some will make a choice that they think they have. That right and wrong is determined by how many people think that way. Is that where you're at? Where the polls are? That determines right and wrong. The vast majority of people, what they think, all your kinfolks, all your buddies think this way. What about it's right, I don't care if anybody thinks that way? What about I don't care if the United States of America doesn't agree with me? What about I don't care if the state of Florida doesn't agree with me? What about I don't care if my family doesn't agree with me? What about I don't care if you don't agree with me? What about doing the right thing? Just doing the right thing and making the right choice, whether it's popular or unpopular, it doesn't matter. But no, some think it's decided to be right and wrong by how many think that way. See, this is a funny thing because this is what's going on all the time in life. This is the continual thing we see. People who make compromising choices that they think they have. People who make crucifixion choices of things they don't like religion, and they crucify it to themselves. Are people who make charge choices that they think they have the right because the majority of my buddies ain't doing it. Do you? Do you really have the choice you think you have? Let me challenge you just a moment. In John chapter 19, verses 10 and 11, Pilate says to Jesus, Did you know that I have power to crucify you and power to release it. I have that power. Jesus answered and said, you could have no power at all against me unless it had been given you from above. Listen to me. You don't even have the power to choice except that God gave it to you. You don't have any power. God's got it all. You just think you got the ability. It's just an illusion. It's like the end of the world. We think all these decisions we're making are so critical that we're the ones deciding all these things. Have you ever read the scriptures? And I've left a few there for you. That there was a book written before the world was made. And it has the names already written in the book of everybody that's going to heaven. Now you can deny it, but the book exists. And it's in heaven. Who makes the decisions? You have the power. Really? Do you? It may be rather that what Jesus the Christ is or who he is, maybe it's about what he thinks of us, not what we think about him. In Matthew 13, verse 41, it says, the Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and those who practice lawlessness. Matthew 16, 27, for the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each according to his works. Matthew 25, verse 31 says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all his holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory, and all the nations will gather before him, and he will separate one from another as a shepherd divides the sheep from the goats. You know that little seat that Pilate sat in won't mean much then, will it? Just like the little seat you're sitting in. Won't mean much then, will it? It may turn out that all those who choose their reputation, you know, because you may not realize this, but there are a lot of people, it's all about their cool, their reputation. They're too intelligent to be too religious. They're too cool to be too religious. They're too powerful to be weak like you folks. They're too rich to be too religious. They're too important to be too religious. They're even too important to even appear to be a believer in Jesus. And they would never get in a baptistry and have their hair come out and look nappy. The thing is that what you may think is your serious decision, there's actually another decision, and it's how he will judge you, how he will judge me. Mark 8, verse 38, whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him the Son of Man also will be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. You know, won't this be awful? The King of the universe looks at you and said, I'm embarrassed to look at you. John 12, verse 48, he who rejects me and does not receive my words has that which judges him. The word that I have spoken will judge him in the last day. There it is. There's a young man at a tent meeting. Some of you have never been. It's wonderful to go to a tent meeting. The greatest thing about it is all the insects that are out there with you. I'll never forget being scared to death when a giant grasshopper landed right square on my nose. A young man got up to tell his story of becoming a follower of Jesus in one of those old tent meetings. And he obviously had never spoken in public. Never got in front of the crowd, said anything. He was not a speaker. And so, because he was actually doing a pretty bad job he stumbled everywhere as he spoke, right? He never spoken like that. Stumbling everywhere. A guy that didn't even believe in Jesus at the back of the tent yelled out, "You ought to be ashamed getting up in front of this crowd and talking like that when you can't even talk." And the young man yelled back, "You're right. I am ashamed of myself, but I'm not ashamed of Jesus. Not ashamed of Jesus. What then shall I do with Jesus, which is called Christ? Without shame, believe in him. Without shame, confess him. Without shame, turn to him with your whole heart. Without shame, be baptized in his name. Without shame, live for him." That's what you do with Jesus. And then you'll realize it's not so much what you did, it's what Jesus is going to do with you. If you need Jesus, won't you come while we stand and while we sing?